From 2020 to 2025, anonymous circles expanded a disciplined practice: breath, logs, and resonance sessions. Lights and dreams trained steadiness over spectacle, shaping humans into instruments for contact. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're watching from and what you believe about extraterrestrial contact. After 2020, the world wobbled in ways that exposed how thin many certainties had become. For the anonymous circles that had trained for years beneath quiet skies, the turbulence felt strangely familiar. They had already rehearsed what to do when the frame of reference shifts, lengthen the exhale, soften the jaw exactly when surprise tightens it, widen attention to include the periphery, and speak only after the notebook holds what the eyes saw. What had been a craft for meeting the unknown at night became a way to meet difficult days without panic. Competence migrated from hillsides into kitchens, from dew-soaked fields into crowded apartments. And the ethics stayed the same: accuracy over entertainment, humility over hurry, care over clamor. The practice adapted without losing itself. Circles met in smaller numbers, sometimes staggered through the week, sometimes spaced far apart along the same field. They added health and weather checks to pre-briefs, shortened sessions when fatigue would have turned attention brittle, and codified a gentler cadence for debriefs: water first, warm food second, words third. They learned that adrenaline loves theory, so they postponed theory until warmth returned to hands and faces. Logs became more concise and more precise, with headings, rough altitude estimates, duration in seconds, and a simple space to record bodily sensations before anyone reached for interpretation. Phenomena did not retreat. If anything, appearances grew more precisely timed to the collective mood. Nights of heightened public anxiety often coincided with sequences the circles had learned to recognize: the environmental hush, the bone-deep hum, the single point blooming along the horizon without arc of approach, and the quiet formation of three lights into clean geometry that held as if distance were a choice. The events were never loud enough to coerce belief, but they were calibrated to reward discipline. People who had practiced for years felt addressed rather than impressed. The phenomenon seemed tuned to the edge where steadiness matters and spectacle does not help. Dreams continued the curriculum indoors. Across regions, participants woke before dawn with the sense that they had been coached, not dazzled. The spaces were circular, the light diffuse, the instruction bodily: stand with feet grounded, allow the shoulders to drop, lengthen the breath exactly when the ribcage wants to lock, look with the whole field rather than the narrow beam. Symbols showed up underfoot like notes in a score, geometry that hummed meaning instead of spelling it. When people compared structures later, facilitators watched for scaffolding rather than adjectives. The order of rooms, the quality of light, the posture taught, the way the lesson ended with composure instead of proclamation. Children joined more frequently, welcomed with care. They were given short intervals: sit with the sky for 90 seconds, then walk, then sit again. They learned to name clouds without romance, and to write what they saw before asking what it meant. Parents noticed side effects that no device would measure: fewer bedtime spirals, calmer disagreements, more accurate descriptions of feelings. The skill of describing the firmament without embellishment bled into describing the heart without panic. No doctrine was assigned, skills were taught that would be honorable in any future. The culture protected itself by staying ordinary. Attempts to turn gatherings into content found no purchase. Anyone who sought a spotlight was met with kindness and a firm invitation to practice elsewhere. The network kept its hygiene: no rosters, no public calendars, no named sites, nothing that would invite crowds to trample either the land or the quiet. Authority, to the extent it existed, meant the capacity to distribute authority. Teach what you know until others can do it without you, then melt back into the group. A night from early 2021 shows how the craft looked when it worked. The group had been quiet for nearly an hour when the insect's chorus thinned and stopped. A subtle pressure gathered behind eyes. A warm sweep crossed forearms despite cold air. A point brightened low and held perfectly still. Then two more arrived and locked into an equilateral triangle that refused wind. Breaths slowed collectively without command. For long minutes the shape held, then collapsed to a single brightness, and dimmed like a lamp lowered behind milk glass. No one rushed to narrate or to film. The first minute belonged to noticing. The debrief revealed nothing glamorous, only competence. Times aligned across note-takers to within seconds. Headings varied by a few degrees, exactly as Vantage would predict. Sensation reports overlapped without parroting. Hum felt, pressure logged, warmth noted. Dull questions were asked and answered. Were clocks synchronized? Were any lenses flaring? Could known traffic account for the hold? The answers narrowed options without insisting on conclusions. The night did not change the world. It changed the people who had practiced how to meet it. Elsewhere that year, circles experimented with synchronized attention across distance. At an agreed minute they breathed in the same pattern, softened gaze into wide attention, and held the sky as if it were a single dome stretched over far-flung hills. No demand was made of the unknown. Sometimes, minutes later, separate logs would record brief appearances so similar in timing and geometry that coincidence felt thin. Whether the exercises drew events or only tuned perception remained an honest question. The practice continued because it improved people regardless of outcome. By the end of 2021, the lesson had settled. Success was no longer measured by whether something appeared, but by whether people could remain lucid when it did, and when it did not. The craft had become a civic muscle. It taught how to cooperate without heroics, how to notice without demanding, and how to keep life intact even while standing in the path of extraordinary things. If open dialogue waits somewhere ahead, these years will be remembered as the time when the instrument, human attention coupled to breath and care, was tuned to hold it. During 2022, the practice revealed how well it could scale without losing itself. New circles appeared like seeds taking root after rain, small, local, and stubbornly ordinary. No central office issued guidance. The method replicated because it was simple enough to be taught in an evening and demanding enough to take a lifetime to master. Arrive early. Check weather, air traffic windows, and satellite trains. Agree on hand signals for silence and for logging. Hold a short breath pattern together to settle the group. Watch without demand. Write before you speak. Compare precisely. Care for one another before you theorize. That modest architecture guarded the culture from distortion. People who wanted hero stories generally did not stay. Those who wanted proof found the patience strange at first, and then clarifying. Those who wanted practice discovered the quiet satisfaction of competence, the ability to remain lucid while the frame around you rearranges itself. The skies seemed to respond to competence more than to desire. Reports from distant regions, written in different languages and later anonymized, carried structures that matched with unnerving fidelity. In one part of the world, a group logged a hush and bone tone followed by a slow emergence and triangular hold. Hours later, across time zones, another group recorded the same sequence in the same order, adjusting for local headings. The logs did not pronounce meaning, they described behavior. Meaning, if it exists, would have to grow from behavior that repeated. By year's end, repetition was the one thing no one could deny. Physical preludes multiplied into a small lexicon the whole network could recognize. The pressure behind the eyes, the warmth that crossed the forearms in cold air, the metallic tang at the back of the tongue, the sense that the body itself was being tuned. These entries began to appear as consistently as times and angles. Participants joked that their ribcages had become early warning instruments. The joke held because it was useful. Dreams during this period acquired the clarity of drills. People reported being guided through balance under pressure. Stand while a wave moves slowly through you. Keep the exhale long exactly when the chest wants to lock. Let the jaw soften when surprise stiffens it. Widen attention so the whole field remains present even when a bright point tries to steal it. These accounts did not attempt to predict public events or offer new cosmologies. They taught the same old thing the practice always had: how to be a good instrument. Not every night produced a sighting, and that was never a failure. Circles learned to value uneventful hours because they multiply stamina. They drank warm tea, shared quiet jokes to loosen the grip of expectation, and returned to silence as easily as they had left it. On nights when nothing appeared, logs sometimes carried the best sentences. A portrait of patience done well. A sketch of how humans behave when no applause is coming. Ethics continued to evolve toward clarity. Anonymity remained non-negotiable. There were still no rosters, no maps, no public calendars, and no named sites. Anyone who tried to monetize gatherings was thanked for their time and released with courtesy. The unknown would not be sold as content. It would be met as relationship. One evening in mid-year revealed how the smallest choices shape the largest moments. A newcomer whispered a theory just as a hush descended. The guide lifted a hand, 2 fingers pressed together, the agreed signal for silence, and the circle relaxed back into attention. A point brightened on the horizon, then a second and a third, settling into a triangle like pins in dark fabric. No one moved for devices during the first minute. Breaths slowed, pens hovered. When the geometry finally dimmed, the debrief began with water and a minute of quiet before anyone wrote a word. Later, comparing notes, the group discovered that 3 people had felt warmth sweep the forearms at nearly the same second. Another 2 had tasted the familiar trace of metal at the tongue's back. The alignment did not prove anything to outsiders, but inside the circle it reinforced the habit that mattered most: do less, notice more. Participants increasingly described the encounters as a form of feedback. If anxiety spiked, the lights vanished. If composure returned, they sometimes reappeared. The teaching was not subtle. First, regulate the human side of the threshold. Everything else depends on that. The circles found themselves repeating a sentence during pre-briefs. The unknown respects steadiness. And you? Have you noticed how your own calmness, or its absence, changes what unfolds around you? Share a moment in the comments when steadiness altered the outcome, however small. Your example might be the practice someone else needs tonight. By autumn, the network had proof of concept, not proof of visitors, but proof that a culture can expand without hollowing out. Training materials fit on a few pages. Instruction never required a podium. Competence traveled hand to hand. It looked like people arriving on time, keeping promises to rest, and declining the invitation to dramatize. It sounded like a soft voice reading times while others compared headings. It felt like ordinary kindness made stronger by use. The year closed with a quiet realization. The circles no longer treated contact as a rare prize to be hunted. They treated it as a relationship being practiced into existence, carefully, patiently, and with enough humility that the human instrument might be trusted with more in due time. Across 2023 and 2024, the network learned what coherence feels like when it stretches across distance. Resonance sessions that had once been simple experiments became routine practice. At an agreed minute, circles separated by oceans breathed in the same pattern for 60 seconds, held a posture that kept ribs mobile and jaws soft, and let attention widen until each person felt the sky as a single dome rather than a scatter of points. No one asked for a show. Yet often, within minutes, independent logs captured appearances that behaved like different instruments, answering the same pitch. In one region, 3 points rose along the horizon, locked into an equilateral triangle, and held steady as if wind were a suggestion. In another, a single point brightened without apparent approach, hovered at a fixed altitude, then dimmed as if someone had lowered a shade behind it. Elsewhere, a faint beam touched ground for seconds and left a brighter patch that faded by morning. None of these events would have settled an argument for the disinterested. All of them, written in sober lines by people who had trained not to dramatize, read like chapters in the same book. Dreams during this stretch looked less like visions and more like instruction sets. Participants woke with muscle memory they did not remember acquiring, the knack for keeping the exhale long exactly when alarm wants to make it short, the habit of letting the tongue rest against the roof of the mouth so the jaw stops clamping, the ability to widen attention without losing precision when a bright point tries to seize it. Several described being walked slowly through sequences that tested balance, a soft pressure from behind the knees, a tilt in the floor that asked for adjustment, a luminous presence taking one step closer while the body stayed grounded. The lesson never shifted: steadiness first, meaning later. Field ethics hardened as the culture matured. Guides reminded circles that cameras are clumsy in the first minute, when adrenaline peaks and hands shake. They requested that observers live the opening 60 seconds with the body and the notebook before reaching for a device. Counterintuitively, this restraint produced better documentation later. When people did film, Their hands were steadier, their narration quieter, and their estimates anchored by notes already on paper. It also protected the encounters from turning into contests over who captured the most impressive pixels. An anonymized repository, maintained by rotating teams, improved comparison without endangering privacy. Participants uploaded excerpts stripped of any hint of identity, timestamps, headings, durations, and the small lexicon of sensations: hush, hum, pressure, warmth, metallic tang. Auditors checked entries against satellite trains and traffic corridors and flagged places where phrasing drifted toward drama. Corrections were delivered with kindness and precision, never with scorn. The shared goal was to keep the background clean so the signal, whatever it was, could be seen for what it was. Not everything went smoothly. A cluster of drones staged by hobbyists fooled a news circle one spring night, and embarrassment carried into the debrief. Instead of scolding, the guide turned the failure into curriculum, a walkthrough of distinctive drone sounds, common flight patterns, and the way LEDs smear when seen through thin mist. A month later, the same circle handled a faint, hovering light with such restraint that the logs read like a different group had written them. This was the rhythm everywhere: error, digestion, upgrade. Families continued to find a place by the thermoses and blankets. Young observers learned to count silently during durations, to sweep the sky in gentle grids, and to listen for the moment when insects quieted in a way that felt intentional rather than weather-bound. Parents reported that children who could wait out a slow hour under the stars could also wait out a strong emotion at home. The practice had smuggled a public good into private life. Quick pause: if this patient, collaborative way of meeting the unknown resonates with you, leave a comment and follow the channel so these stories reach people who value rigor as much as wonder. Have you ever noticed a small discipline, like writing before speaking, changing an entire experience? One night late in 2023 became a shared reference point across continents. Separate circles recorded near-identical sequences within a narrow window: the hush, the hum, a brightening point, a second and third joining to form a triangle, a long, unmoving hold, a soft collapse to one, and a dimming that felt like brightness lowered behind glass. Headings differed by expected degrees, durations matched within a sliver, and sensation logs overlapped without echo. No one declared revelation. Everyone acknowledged coherence. As 2024 wore on, circles realized they had quietly changed the question they were living. It was no longer, "Will something appear?" but, "How ready are we to remain human if it does?" In practice, that meant more attention to rest, to food and water, to the kindness of letting quiet people speak before confident ones in debriefs, and to the discipline of leaving places cleaner than they were found. The work looked like care because care was the work. In private notes, many participants admitted that life had grown roomier. Waiting did not feel like failure anymore. Ambiguity did not demand immediate story. People noticed that mundane relationships improved when the same rules were applied indoors: breathe, describe, compare, decide, and then rest. The sky had taught a form of citizenship by insisting that capacity mattered more than certainty. By the close of 2024, a calm consensus had formed. The visitors, if that label fits, appeared to prefer thresholds to finales. They tuned appearances to the edge where training is rewarded and showmanship is useless. The circles, for their part, had become hard to startle and easy to steady. Between those two tendencies, a conversation was already underway, quiet as a tide and just as persistent. By 2025, the quiet network had become something the wider world could not easily measure and could hardly imagine: a culture that practiced steadiness as a public good and contact as a patient craft. It had no leaders to interview, no headquarters to film, no map to leak. It existed in notebooks, in breath patterns shared under stars, in the kind of competence that leaves few dramatic footprints and deep, humane ones. The phenomena did not escalate towards spectacle. They held their tuning, subtle enough to be deniable to the uninterested, repeatable enough to train those who showed up with care. Across regions, logs continued to capture the familiar sequence with small variations: the hush, the hum, the brightening point, the geometric hold, the soft collapse, the lamp behind glass dim. When compared months later, The entries lined up like staves of a song played in different rooms at the same tempo. Dreams kept their quiet course. Participants reported lessons that felt like rehearsals rather than revelations. Hold posture when startle flashes through the ribs. Keep the exhale longer than the inhale during surprises. Let the mouth rest in such a way that thought stays clear. And remain aware of the whole field even when a bright point of attention tries to monopolize it. Some wrote of symbols that pulse like chords underfoot. Again, more like notation than proclamation. The through line was unchanged. Develop capacity in the instrument, and larger conversations will have somewhere to land. The network's ethics, tested by growth, held. Anonymity protected ordinary lives and prevented heroes' stories from forming. No one became a brand. No location became a shrine. Because there were no public promises, there were no public scandals when clouds or fatigue made a night uneventful. The practice had learned to be accountable to itself rather than to an audience. Care expanded from a courtesy into infrastructure. Guides refined a simple ladder for difficult nights: water, warmth, writing, words. They modeled how to discharge adrenaline with a few standing movements, how to notice where tension hid in the jaw and shoulders, and how to return to breath when the mind sprinted toward conclusions. They also checked on one another the next day, because integration takes time and kindness. This ordinary kindness, thermoses, extra gloves, a spare notebook, turned out to be the strongest technology the culture possessed. Auditing matured into a rhythm that felt like hygiene rather than suspicion. Rotating teams compared anonymized timelines with astronomical and traffic data, flagged phrasing that drifted towards story, and asked dull questions that kept bright clarity. Was fatigue logged? Did one person write before hearing others? Were clocks synchronized? Are there known satellite trains along that heading in that minute? The goal was never to win an argument outside the circles. It was to keep the practice honest enough that whatever keeps happening can keep teaching. Families continued to arrive at field edges with blankets and small hopes. Children learned to count durations, to sweep the sky in gentle grids, and to respect silence. Many grew fluent in describing both the world outside and the one inside without collapsing either into drama. Parents noted that the same discipline that steadied a night under strange light also steadied homework frustrations and sibling quarrels. The craft had leaked into life, and life was better for it. People often asked, in private letters and late-night talks, why undeniable noon had not yet arrived. Would it not be simpler if the visitors flooded the sky and ended the conversation with certainty? The best answer the culture could offer was an inference distilled from repetition, because capacity outlives certainty. A spectacle can be denied tomorrow or metabolized into noise by evening. A population trained to remain lucid under ambiguity is harder to unwind. The visitors, if that word applies, seem to prefer thresholds that educate over finales that coerce. This preference shaped how circles define success in 2025. They measured not the number of appearances but the quality of their response. Did we remain calm? Did we write before we spoke? Did we care for the people who shook? Did we leave the place cleaner than we found it? Did we subtract the ordinary before asserting the extraordinary? Those questions, answered over hundreds of nights, generated a kind of confidence that did not need applause and could not be purchased. The wider world continued to lurch from certainty to certainty, and yet participants reported a different arc in their own lives. Fear of death loosened its grip. Anxiety stopped dictating the day. Conversations slowed to a humane pace. Neighbors who might have stayed strangers shared thermoses and learned the shape of silence together. No headline recorded these outcomes. They were recorded in gentler mornings and in the way tempers failed to catch fire. As for the future, the culture refused prophecy and chose preparation. It kept arriving early and staying a little late. It kept teaching newcomers that writing before speaking makes memory trustworthy. It kept telling a truth that many had learned the hard way, that not knowing is not failure, and that humility is the single most robust guardrail humans can build against both credulity and contempt. It kept its eyes on the work that might matter most if noon ever arrives: how to meet surprise without breaking the moment. The story therefore closes without closing. The lights appear when they do, tuned to a threshold where discipline is rewarded. The dreams teach what they teach, tuned to the body that must carry them, and the people keep practicing what they practice, tuned to one another. If open contact steps into the middle of day, the citizens who trained in the margins will recognize the rhythm and breathe through it. If it never does, those same citizens will still be worth having around, because they know how to stay kind when the frame wobbles. In either case, the bridge has already been walked, one breath, one honest line in a notebook, one small act of care at a time. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who are also fascinated by UFOs. And leave your thoughts in the comments. What do you think really happened?